Hi and welcome to the Lightleaders, a podcast for lightworkers and conscious entrepreneurs who are passionate about raising the consciousness of our planet and take action to make it happen. I'm your host, Alexis Lember, and I believe that we are currently in the middle of a global awakening of humanity, that right now is the time for heart-centered conscious people to step into our power so we can replace the old paradigm and bring the conscious new earth into manifestation. So here, I'll interview a variety of people who lead this movement of creating this new earth, whether they do it through a meditation course, a conscious podcast, or an ethical cryptocurrency. I call them light leaders. If you resonate with our mission, please help us spread the message by sharing this podcast. We're having more and more content getting censored, so we need your help. Make sure to stay in touch also by registering to our newsletter on thelightleaders.org. If you hear little nuggets you love and you'd like to share, screenshot this episode and share on your Instagram stories, make sure to tag us at the Lightleaders podcast and we will. Do you know what is probably the most valuable resource in the modern world? It's your data. Companies like Facebook, Apple, or Google, they're worth hundreds of billions of dollars because they spy on you 24/7, collect everything they can about you, and sell your data to advertisers. They also use this data against you to get you addicted to their platforms, so you spend more time on your screen and more to censor certain opinions and whistleblowers. Now, what to do? Well, I always prefer to look at solutions. And there is a phone that runs on its own operating system that is based on encrypted blockchain technology, not Google or Apple. It's called the Clear Phone. With the Clear Phone, you own your data and choose what you want to share with apps and service providers and potentially be rewarded financially for agreeing to share your data. To learn more, visit thelightleaders.org/clearphone. And you can also become a brand ambassador for them like I am. Hi, and welcome to this new episode of The Light Leaders. Today, I'm with Brian Swan. Brian is the co-founder of the Unstoppable Branding Agency and founder of Unstoppable Beard. He's a former robotics engineer serving the semiconductor, biotech, and aerospace industries for the Western United States from 1997 to 2006. Before migrating to entrepreneurship online, he's created multiple businesses online from e-commerce, consulting, marketing, and branding, while his specialty is in strategic business development. And Brian, you're also the father of Annalie Swan that we had last week here in the Light Leaders.
Beautiful.
And the husband of Rhonda Swan that we've had
That's right.
a few weeks ago.
Mama. You got the Unstoppables in the house right now.
Unstoppable family, right? That's how you branded also.
That's
this
how
whole
it branded
experience.
when we started our travels way back in 2008.
Yeah. And you're a surfer too?
Surfer, yeah.
Living the good life. Can you give us a little bit of background on your story on how you today created your brand and also the Unstoppable family?
Yeah. You know, I'm gonna rewind it way back until, so right now I'm 47 years old, and I'm gonna rewind it back to when I was 11 years old and how things really started. Back then, this is what really transformed not only my life, but now my wife, my daughter's life, and how we really live day to day. My father actually, he was gay. And found that out at 9 years old. It just kind of really blew my mind on, like, okay, living in a small 2,000 town in Cambridge, Illinois, so like 1,400 kilometers away from the ocean. And at the age of 11, there was this, we never talked about it, but there was this switch in my dad where he knew he had an expiration date. And he didn't know if he had 6 months to live, 1 year to live, 2 years, 5 years. Fortunately, he lived for 5 years. But what I saw within that time frame was that he didn't know when his day may be his last. And he started living the bucket list movie before the bucket list movie came out. And I have my brother who's 4 years older, my sister 7 years older than me. And he was just like, who wants to go to Europe? Who wants to go to Egypt? Who wants to go? And being from this little small town in a farming community where, baling hay, detasseling corn, far from any of the, these, the worlds like Indonesia, I was like, okay. And I got to go travel and see the world. And it really opened my mind of like, we're bigger than this little anthill at such a small age. So now if you can take reference of like Liberace, and I'm trying to think of the guy from Queen who died of AIDS.
Freddie Mercury. Thank you, Annalise.
So it was all this time when they were passing away, Magic Johnson, who's living now, but it was like a death sentence. So you knew that, your expiration date is coming up. But what happened at that time is I got to witness death from the age of 11 to 16. And it was from that moment, I'm like, I'm going to do things differently. And for instance, when I graduated from high school and went to the University of Illinois, I started doing robotics engineering. My second year, I was like, there's got to be something more to life than just fraternities, sororities, parties, and the college lifestyle. It was the best thing in the world. And I went, you know what? I'm going to go travel. And I only thought, this is how naive I was. I only thought there was 2 other countries in the world that spoke English. I thought it was Australia and England. That's really what I thought. And I went to Australia, and this moment, there's always, I think there's defining moments in your life. One of them, I went to the beach the second day I was there, and I saw a hot chick in a bikini, and I saw a guy catch a head-high barrel. And I just remember like, whoa, I'm like, I'm going to be that. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but that's the kind of the lifestyle. And from right then, it's like, that's where I started learning to surf, and I started living this lifestyle. So 1,400 kilometers away from the ocean to like, I'm going to be this.
How old were you then?
I was 20 years old. So 27 years ago.
Okay. And there's been a bit of time then between that realization and the moment you started living that like this, right?
It was there when I saw like the movie, The Endless Summer, these classic movies. And when I graduated, after I spent a year over in Australia, which was in Perth, I was there for a year, and it was in March of 1995. And my roommate, so living in Perth, you're 3 hours away. He goes, we got to go to Bali. And I was like, Bali? I'm like, what's Bali? And I remember stepping off the plane and just looking out. I'm like, I never knew this world existed. So if you think about this, in 1995, I saw, all of Bali. I was blown away. And I was sitting on the beach in Kuta, and I remember looking out like at Uluwatu. So when you're sitting in Kuta, and Kuta wasn't like what Kuta, there was like nothing really. There's hotels, a couple bars, restaurants, nothing like. And I just remember looking out at Uluwatu, and I was just learning to surf. And I said to myself, another defining moment was like going, how can I live this lifestyle? Little did I know that one of the gentlemen that created Netscape, like the first worldwide browser, was actually creating it in the lab room that I was working in. But it was from that, I was like,
Kuta.
Well, he was in University of Illinois, but because I knew nothing, the internet didn't exist. But I was like, how could I actually do this? I'm like, and then this is like, it just appears. And that's what's, I did robotics engineer for 10 years, right? Working semiconductor, life sciences, biotech. I sold actuators to Elon Musk back in like 2002, 2003. I didn't know who the guy was, but he had a rocket on his floor. I'm like, whoa. But it was during this time, I'm like, huh. And here's an interesting thing, because you've already had my wife, Rhonda. She's the unstoppable mama. And we did a trip in 2004 to Bali and to the Metawais. And we're sitting in Kuta, and I'm like, I'm ready to go hang out, go party. And she looks at me and she goes, isn't there something more to life? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I go, we both got 6-figure corporate jobs. I'm in the robotics industry, kind of a high prestigious kind of level, but I'm working a corporate job. She was in the pharmaceutical world, and that whole world, that's why she actually quit, because she started realizing like, what am I actually doing? What is my purpose? And it was from there that my wife, shortly after that, she had a a big situation to where she witnessed a woman coming in late for work. And my wife wanted to share this, but I think it's so important. We just, and I'm going to like circle it back. We just bought our first $1 million house, our second house in California, 2003. And she tells me, I want to have a family. I'm like, of course we're going to have a family. That's why we bought this 5-bedroom house. And this is why we're overlooking the ocean, surfing before we go get into our cars and drive to work, 1 hour each way.
The American dream.
The American dream. And she goes, I'm not going to put my kids in daycare. And I looked at her. I'm like, I don't care if I'm my boss's boss's boss. I'm never going to have enough to pay our mortgage. And she goes, you better find another job. I go, you better find something that you can work from home. And if you can think about that, that was actually around 2004. She goes, okay. Little did I know, she Googled stay-at-home mom, got started with some business and personal development, talking law of attraction before the movie The Secret came out. So like way back in the day, she retired me from my corporate job. And it was like,
what was she doing?
She was in a before the pharmaceutical or in the business. It was an affiliate marketing that had a personal development course, and then we had events. So like a 3-day and a 5-day event, having speakers in the personal development. Like a lot of the speakers then were people from the movie The Secret. But I went from the first event sitting with my arms. I gotta watch out this microphone, but sitting in my arms. There's 1,000 people out there. And we're in Cancun, Mexico. And I'm sitting there in the back going, what are these people all about? What is this law of attraction?
What was the company?
Liberty League International. Okay. Way back in the day. They no longer exist. They probably broke up about 10 years, maybe even more. Okay. But it was that thing to where it just opened up my mind that these people, they may not be smarter, but they want to do something different. And it was just that switch. There's like, there could be something else out there. There could be something more and meaningful. And that was what gave us like the whole break of like, and it was what really got me was when my wife, she had a $47,000 a month, and I was like, oh my God, I'm like, this internet thing can really work. And that's what catapulted us. So we quit our job. She retired me from my job. We just kept on investing heavily in real estate. We were rock and rolling, having 3 cars, big house, bought another house in San Diego, invested in a big golf course real estate development deal. And 2 weeks after Hanalei was born, we found out that we were losing everything. So we went from millionaire status to losing everything like that. And that was another defining moment. And it was
the real estate bubble.
It was in the real estate. We were going to lose it anyway because we were just we were too cocky. We thought everything we touched turned to gold. So it was a matter of time. If it wasn't this thing, it would have been something else. And it was and I believe that everything happens for a reason. And we wouldn't be doing what we're doing now unless if we went through one of the worst moments in our life. And for 1.5 years, we were dealing with lawyers, lawsuits, mental mind. We had family involved, friends. It was horrible. But when we made this decision, we're like, and it was from Tim Ferriss. I read the book multiple times, and there was this chapter called The Mini Retirement. And he was talking about how if you had a system, something automated or something online, you could live everywhere in the world. And I was like, what if we just got rid of everything and just went and lived our perfect day now? And I said to my wife, what if we got rid of everything? And she goes, are you crazy? And it kept on happening to where I finally asked her on June 5th, 2008. And we popped a bottle of wine to where we're saving for a special moment. This is what's crazy. I told her to listen to this chapter in the book, and I go, I want you to listen to this chapter while I go to sleep and just listen to it outright. And I woke up at 2 a.m. She wasn't in bed. I walked downstairs, and she's in the kitchen on the computer at 2 a.m. She's typing in Bali. And I was like, yes. And that's what set it off.
I think maybe half of the people are having that chair I've had a big realization also with reading the 4-hour work week, and that's been the case for me too. So Tim Ferriss, if you come to Bali,
Tim Ferriss,
there's a spot here.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
To honor him.
Yeah.
And where did the perfect day come from out of it?
Yeah. You know, it was that personal development. It was like a $1,500 course. And my wife, she was, I didn't know, I was too scared to actually do any journaling or do any deep work on myself. And I didn't even know what deep work meant or I didn't know, but she had this course that she already had. And she goes, why don't you do it? And for 6 months, I looked at it, and the first exercise was how to create your perfect day. And I was so scared to write in it for 6 months. And it was fear of what my wife would think if she found it. What would my friends think if they found it? What if this didn't come true? What if I was going to fail or whatever? But it was that first exercise that I actually wrote out, and I have the screenshot of it. I have a picture of it, August 16th, 2006. And I wrote out what my perfect day would look like. And it's pretty much kind of what I'm living at now versus I was describing how I'd be living in Hanalei Bay, which Hanalei, that's where we named her after we got married. But that's where it really started, was that one exercise.
And circling back to, also you mentioned your father having that expiry date, and is it also seeing how your father lived when he knew that, and that connection to death, that made you want to take that jump and go for it in a way?
Well, I'm going to tell you this is the little, when I wrote out what my perfect day would look like was when we're on the top of the world. And so even if it didn't, like, I knew we were going to have enough money to, like, we can do this, no problem. But shortly after that is when we lost everything. And that's when, after 2 weeks, when Hanalei was born. And so in 2007, she was born April 17th. We just looked at each other and went, what do we do? Do we go back and get our corporate jobs? Because when you're losing everything and then you're trying to sell a high ticket item for like $20-some thousand to people on wealth consciousness, and you're losing everything, you can't make a dime. And we're like, what do we do? And my wife, from that story that I told you, she looked at me and she said, I made a vow never to put my daughter in daycare. And I said, from experiencing my father's life of not knowing when your expiration date is, I said, we better go live our perfect day right now. And I'm not talking about a perfect day, just 24 hours you have left to live, but what is your ideal average day going to look like? And it was at that point when we both said that, that's when we made the decision. It's like, let's go do this now. And when we said it, we said we're going to go on a 2-year trip around the world. Now it's, indefinite. It's 13 years later. My daughter's 14. And this is now I can't even see like that life for going back into the matrix. It doesn't even make sense to me anymore.
And I love that approach also. It doesn't have to be so radical, but trying, maybe taking a year or even a few months. I mean, same when I quit my job, I thought, okay, I'm going to try my dream of doing my personal growth company, living between Australia and Bali for 6 months, and I'll see, and worst case, doesn't work out, but it's definitely good to try. Right?
And what's worst case scenario? You gotta, what's the worst case and what's the best case? But so many people are afraid to make that leap. And, and I actually did this exercise. I put it out. I recreated that how to create your perfect day exercise. I put it up on YouTube like 10 years ago. And there's so many people in Bali that actually found that video. And that was the catalyst.
I was going to say, I've had Gavin Dentis, for example, in this chair.
And many other people
talking to me so much about it. And that was like a year and a half ago. And then I did it too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I'm pretty much living it too.
Yeah.
So it works really well. And also feel like that's something that might be more around now, but 10 years ago was really pioneer, right?
It wasn't like, we're really like the first digital nomad families. So that was working online, traveling, and that was how you did it. There was no such word as digital nomad. So when we made the decision and we said, and people knew that we were losing everything. And when we made the decision, we had people just like, how could you do this to your daughter? She's going to be broken. She's not going to have any friends, all blah, blah, blah. And, it was at that time I was like, well, I'm going to go with my heart. And if something's not working, let's course correct. But like, let's not live in fear and like, okay, we're going to go back and get our jobs. Because if we go back and get our jobs, we're basically living dead, It's like, why?
I'm super excited to have you here because you embody so much that like freedom lifestyle, but also have a family, right? You have your wife, Rhonda, and your daughter, Annalie. And sometimes when people see my life in Bali, they will say, oh, yeah, you're living that digital nomad lifestyle, but that's because you don't really have responsibilities, you don't have kids. And some people find it would be impossible if you have kids. And you've obviously demonstrated it's not. So I find it super inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. What's funny is like before we, like when we were still rocking and rolling, before we lost everything, we actually took a trip around, for like 3 months, Rhonda and I, in 2006, a year before Hanalei was born. And we said, we're going to, let's conceive a child while we're on a trip because we can't travel with kids. But it was actually from the 4-hour work week, we're like, this internet thing is not going anywhere. And it's like we have nothing to lose right now. When you have nothing to lose, you're just like, well, what do you have? What are you really fearful of at that time?
Have you had other families come up and telling you like, oh, you showed me something that I thought was impossible, and
that's probably it's probably the most rewarding thing, because at first there's no one doing what we were doing. I thought there was going to be families and stuff. We traveled for 2 years. We didn't meet anyone, and then you start meeting people, and then people are like, hey, you guys inspired us just by what you're doing. So it's really gratifying to get a lot of messages and people, I'm finally doing it, like even right now even. So many, actually.
And I'm curious because it turned out really well. Listeners can listen to the podcast with Hanalei and be blown away by, how confident and what she's creating. And I'm curious, what was the education then? Like, how did you?
Well, the education with Hanalei was, she went to school when she was 2 years old here in Bali. That was her first school. So she started going to school. She went to school here in Bali. She went to school in Mexico, Peru, Panama, Brazil. And when she got to the age of like 5 years old, we're like, do you want to homeschool? And she goes, no, I want to go to school. She's the only child. She goes, I want to go to school. So she went to school all the way up until 9 years old. And we were here in Bali, so she was going to school for a couple of years. And one of the schools we were going to, we said that she's an artist. She's doing fashion design. And she already started her fashion designing company at 9 years old. And it was from the question, not what do you want to be when you grow up, but what do you want to be now? And I'm sure Hanalei talked about that on her podcast. So you can go back and rewind that. But at the age of 9, she would come home from work and her passion was, designing. And then she'd have to go to her, that wasn't a factory. It's just a design shop. She had 5 employees, but she was exhausted because she would be working with that. And then she would do her artwork. And at like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, she'd just be falling down. And finally we're like, is school, do you want to do that? And she goes, well, let's just test it out. So from the age of, I think about 9 years old, she's homeschooled, but it really hasn't been from Rhonda or myself. She's got the education of seeing us working and seeing us in action. She sees us with our business when we hire, when we fire, when we make important decisions. She's always part of the equation if she wants to be. So she gets the education of that. And she only has a mentor like 2 times a week. She does a little Khan Academy, but we don't put the emphasis on schoolwork. And it was even like a year ago where she goes, Dad, can you help me out with this work? And I start looking at it. I go, I haven't used that since I was in high school. And the only reason I used that was memorization to get a good grade. I go, I go, anything that you have to memorize, do not do. So we do not push her at all on the school. She's very motivated. She's very driven, but we give her guidance and we help her out. And what we do also, I think this is the most important thing, because we're not artists, Rhonda and I, like she's a whole different brain, but we surround ourselves with people that can give her, that kind of education, but it's surrounding with the right people. We keep it very, the circle very close, because we don't want, you got to, energy and we don't want it sucking from her. We want to just bring around the right people where she can learn and see things from a different point of view and learn from that. I don't look at myself as, this is kind of the old school way of like, I'm the superior, or I don't even know what the right word, I'm the superior and you're going to learn from me. Yeah. Rhonda and I, we learn from Hanalei as much as if not more than what she learns from us. And she teaches us, how to be kind, how to be compassionate. And we always ask her, we allow her to make decisions. We've allowed her to be making decisions from early ages. So when you let children make decisions from early ages, it's not difficult when they're...
I was going to say, you talk about the support and the guidance, and at the same time, even that question, what do you want to do now, is like, how do you treat the person then is going to help them come into their power. And it's not because you're a child that you can't be in your power and have responsibility, right?
And it was from a book, The Celestine Prophecy.
I just listened to the podcast and I've just read that book actually.
Yeah. So, it's so powerful. And we got that book, and one of the chapters in there was, one of the chapters was the woman, the mom is with her daughter. And I think the daughter was only 4 years old. And it was treating them like human beings. So when someone asked, like, what is your daughter's name?
Why don't you ask her?
Why don't you ask her? What is your daughter? What would she like to eat? Ask her. She's a human being. She can respond. And it was from there that gave her really the empowerment of, we trust her, and really treating her like, hey, I can make decisions,
Yeah, that's simple, but super powerful and game changing.
It's so simple, but it's so not done, It's so interesting how you've challenged the assumptions of how life could be in so many areas, in family, and traveling, and using the law of attraction. Yeah. Congrats. Thank you.
And I know you also have a really enjoyable lifestyle. Like you're not a hustler, right? Like you have your company and you do things seriously, but at the same time you take a lot of time to surf, to enjoy life.
Absolutely. One of the best things about COVID is it really we started doing, my wife and we started really doing deep work, really going deep within ourselves, and within our relationship, and we've dove real deep. And before COVID, we were traveling 6 months out of the year. So we're always on the move, either having events or speaking at events. But COVID, when you can't move, we're like, well, what do we do? Excuse me, I got a little itch on my nose. But it was at that time to where it's like, what is our highest values? And for instance, I have a beard company, right? Yeah. So for Unstoppable Beard, what's funny about this, we've been joking. I've had a beard for 5 years, and my wife and my daughter and we've talked about having a beard company. And I've always used excuses of, well, we're traveling, we're doing this. And Hanalei, and this is where you got to listen to your kids. Hanalei looked at me, it was probably 3 months after COVID. So probably like this exact same time 1 year ago. And she goes, when are you ever going to start that beard company, Dad? And when your 13-year-old asks you that, you're like, I don't have any more excuses. There's no more excuses. I'm like, I'm not traveling. I'm not doing this. Our branding agency, we're fixing our systems and, creating, it was really building the systems and automating things, because if COVID wasn't a wake up to where you have to be doing something online, brick and mortar, any business, if you haven't got it yet, you're hiding under a rock and you're going to be irrelevant. And it was from there. I'm like, you had to think about it. We have a branding and PR agency. We have a brand. My daughter, she's got a fashion company. And I was like, well, every single thing that I do, I'm like, how is it going to work with what we already have? And I'm like, now a beard, I have a beard, right? On my Unstoppable Surfer brand, it's like, I'm surfing every day. What it comes down to is the things that you're passionate about. And when you don't have to, like, nobody has to tell me to wake up and go check the surf. No one has to tell me to go, it's like, hey, Dad, did you go surf today? No, I'm going to do that every single day. And I'm like, if I can create a brand that revolves around my lifestyle, like of surfing, I'm like, create a brand around what are our values. In her company, it's eco-friendly, being sustainable. I'm like, well, I can have a beard company that has eco-friendly, sustainable. I can learn about e-commerce. I can learn about different types of marketing. But what's also going to happen is that through all my marketing, because we're marketers, through all the marketing stuff, that brand is going to play and it's going to filter people back to our branding agency, to my daughter's company, and vice versa. And people are going to see
like the whole system.
It keeps on, everything's intertwined. So it was like, it wasn't of like, I'm going to do something just because I want to make a beard product. I'm like, I really thought like, this is going to be something that I can really evolve around our branding agency and working together. So.
Yeah, that's smart. I feel in business for people who have a lot of passions, which is my case and also yours. Like sometimes we want to do a new project and it can feel like we're losing the momentum of the old project, but there are smart ways where you can tie them together.
Yeah.
And I feel for me, usually it's like a greater why in a way.
Yeah.
And so that brings me to, I'd love to know if you could share what's your main why, like your mission, vision for the world.
Well, that's a deep one. I think it's really opening people's eyes to what's really possible. And to go deeper on this, we started that way back in 2008. And if you look at this, I'm just going to show you this right here.
So that's a tattoo for the people listening.
This is the tattoo, if you can see it on the video. This is Honolulu Bay. My daughter actually designed this on this, and she did my other tattoo on my back. But you see the date, November 25th, 2008. That's the day that we basically unplugged from the Matrix, left San Diego, and went to Hawaii. And it's embodying the surf, the mountains. This is our plane. This is my wife, the hibiscus. And it evolves, it just kind of wraps everything around that. So we took that, but how can we go even further now? So that, it's a great story. Now everybody's a digital nomad, but now how can, what's really happening? COVID is just, it's that slam in the face of what can we do better? And it was really diving in deeper, doing a lot of work on ourselves, going deep, meditation, medicine. And it's not just, it's becoming a better human being yourself, but then the relationship with my wife and with my family and opening people's eyes to like, you can too do this. And it's really leading by example. And for example, like one of the things that I made a priority, Honolulu, this is so funny, but she's probably said that in the last podcast. She's like, Dad, this COVID thing is really messing with my travel because like it's instilled in her of traveling because we were always traveling every 2 months. So I said to her, I'm like, well, we're not leaving Indonesia this year. We just made a decision. I'm not leaving Indonesia. And the reason why is during this time, there's going to be things that can come up, send me back to the US. I'm just not doing it. Like I got to see how things play out, but this is where I want to be. It's given me the time, freedom to really not only dive deep in within ourselves, but my daughter's 14 and I made a decision. I'm like, we're going to go traveling. And now she's a surfer. It's like, so once a month we're going on a surf trip. We've actually pushed it up to about every 3 weeks because it's our passion of ours, right? We get work done too. It's like, we're not just like, hey, I'm going to go on a surf holiday. We're doing stuff for our brands. This is times where we get to bond. She's doing her sketching for her new fashion design. It's evolving around surf. So it's business. Everything that we do, business is involved with what we do. So it's not just
And with,
either or.
With surfing, it works really well because I like to have my laptop like this. If the surf's great, amazing, I go surfing. If the surf's not that great, I'm not too frustrated because I can work.
No, it's not. And I tell you, being able to have these moments with my daughter, it's priceless. And we have so much, and I think it's just as entrepreneurs, we put that burden on ourselves of like, I got to do this. And if I look at what I have to do over the years, I've always said, I can't do this because I got this, and this. But when you make it a highest value, and I get this from one of Hanale's mentors, he's a friend of ours, Dr. DeMartini. He was on the movie The Secret. Hanale spoke with him on stage in Las Vegas like 3 years ago. But he was so fascinated by Hanale on what do you do in your average day? And she talked about drawing this. And he says, you got to have your life evolve around your 3 highest values: surfing, family, and business for me. And I just make it a priority. Like we just went over to, we just got off the plane straight from Sumbawa and came straight to here. But when I looked at my schedule ahead, and then I'm going away for a 5-day water fast, fire, meditation up in the mountains, no laptop, nothing. I'm doing that in 2 days. Rhonda's just getting back from one. And she went up there and we're like, we're going to go on a surf trip. We're going to go explore. But we made it to where that is the priority versus I have this project, this campaign. And when you make that as just a priority, that you make it as if you have a corporate job and your corporate job says you have to be here or you're fired. What would you do? You show up. And if you treat these things as if you're going to get fired, you're firing yourself, I go. And that's and it's beautiful. It's like we've got to have the best bonding experiences ever.
And that's something you can even reflect in your calendar. For example, I know for me, I used to have a calendar. It was work tasks, and the rest is not prioritized. And then I moved from putting surfing or meditation or spending a day with my partner making love, these kind of things. I would put them in the calendar so it becomes priority and as important.
You have to, and if you don't make it a priority, other things are going to rule your life.
Do you feel you do business way better because you've been surfing on holiday?
100%. Yeah. For instance, this is great. So we have our team, we have a sales team, and I only take referrals. So I don't just, it's got to be somebody who's really to where I'll actually talk to them. But she set my calendar for Friday at 10 a.m. And I'm like, I'm going to just have landed in Lombok. I'm going to be in a transport for 2 hours until I get to the ferry. And then I had another call that was at 1 o'clock while I knew I was going to be on the ferry. And, my old self would say, you can't do that because you're not professional. And I'm like, no, I'm going to be there. I'm going to have backup. But the fact that I was doing the call and doing it wasn't really a presentation. It's more of a bonding getting to know who the person is versus selling. It was an hour in the car and she's like, I'm in. But it's because people want what you have. And if you're driving through Lombok and it's like, we don't have to say how good we are, right? If you're good enough, all the things that they see online, that's like, what are people going to see when they Google your name, right? If they're seeing this stuff already, you don't have to tell how good your stuff is. You just go check it out. But it's when they can also see he's living his highest value. They may not be saying that, but wow, he's actually able to do that while traveling. And they could have cut out. It actually went beautifully, but high-end client. Another high-end client had it at 1 o'clock and they're like, where are you at? I'm like, I'm on the ferry between Lombok and Sumbawa. I'm taking my daughter away for Father's Day weekend. We're going on a surfing trip and we're also going to be looking at property. It's that where you're like, there's going to be some things to where, the internet may cut out, but it's like, if you can do that, I mean, if I was on a call, I'd be like, wow, that's interesting. I was like, I'm going to do that. So your question is, we actually do make more money when I'm surfing and living what I'm really passionate about. It always happens. And when you're grinding at it and you're forcing things, it's the same thing when we lost everything and I'm trying to sell a $20-some thousand wealth conscious, but I'm losing everything inside. And I'm sitting trying to I'm putting dollar signs on people's foreheads and try to force that sale. No one's getting started with you. Energetically, they're going to feel it. Yeah. Like this guy is like, no, I'm not saying it. I'm saying all the right things. But what is he actually, how is it coming across? Yeah. So more I surf, the more I do trips, more money we make. So I think I have to go on a trip again next week. After I go for 5 days meditation on a water fast.
And I do believe people are very sensitive to energy and magnetism, even if they're not conscious of it. It's built in us.
100%. We have these built-in mechanisms that we can smell BS from across the world. It comes across. And do I have time to do a 5-day water fast and praying in the mountains? Like, do I have time for that? Old self, no. But when you make it a priority, it's like, all right, get my things done, and that's a priority.
It ties up to that Tim Ferriss mentality. He talks in a TED talk about when he had to leave for 2 months his business and how it saved his business. And I find the same when I go 5 days away. I come back, I'm like, okay, that's not necessary. Like there's a lot of optimization that I find thanks to that bird eye view that I got from going away a bit.
Absolutely. You gotta be working on yourself. You gotta be, and it's like also, it's what happens too is what we've been doing. We went from Corona, pre-COVID, 8 employees up to like 55 employees now in our branding agency. Wow. And what has happened in that time frame, no one's going to be able to do the work that you do as good as you do. They're just never going to. But it's allowing your people and empowering them to like do it the best you can, and letting things go, because speed to the market is key. And I'm like, if I'm like just trying to, like, no, you can't do this. It's like, there's a lot of things like, but you got to sit back and like, all right, just roll with it. And you'll be surprised how much they can surprise you. And when you give them that like, hey, can you help me out? Like, this is what I'm thinking, but I really like your input. It empowers the employees, and they're like, they take it on as, on their own, versus I'm an employee and I'm just taking directions, or instructions and orders or whatever you want to call it.
And I feel like you're touching on 2 things really important for entrepreneurs. One is when you employ people, how you can have them motivated when you give more freedom. Yeah. And the other one is also, I feel there's a trap in probably a lot of solopreneurs listen to us and trying to do everything themselves. And sometimes when you have less time, you remove yourself a bit. Well, there's maybe someone you can employ to do that.
Absolutely. There's a couple things I want to hit on that.
Or automate also. Like with Inside, I employ or I automate. Yeah. And when I employ, how can I give them more freedom?
So one of the things, and I think I got this from Tim Ferriss, and I'm trying to think of his name. But it'll come to me. But the question was, when he has any new business partners and he hires any new employees, start with why. Would you know that the book Start With Why?
Simon Sinek.
Yeah, Simon. So I heard an interview. I think it was an interview with, maybe it was on Tim Ferriss or something like that. For any new business partner and any new employees, he asks this question. First of all, he says, what do you selfishly want from us? So like when I hire a new salesperson, selfishly, I want them to make sales, right? But what do you selfishly want from Rhonda, myself, or even Hanalei, or the company? Because if we're able to know what they're, what they really want, we also are we're hiring to where they're eventually going to move on, right? But that's kind of like the goal. You want them to be empowered enough to where it's like they're going to fly their own wings. But if you know exactly, like for instance, I want to be closer to Rhonda and I want to be able to speak on stage. And if we know that and we can help orchestrate that, they know that they're here, with like a mission to be able to contribute. And it's like, and we know how to serve them.
Yeah.
And it blows their mind when you actually ask it. And I said, you have to, I say it selfishly, because selfishly, like every single morning I go surf, I do this, and I have to selfishly take care of myself before I can take care of anyone else.
Pour from a filled cup.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do, for example, with this show. I have an amazing guy called David who's creating a lot of the little videos, putting them on the platforms. And the first time, a couple of years ago, when I started hiring a VA, I was more saying, okay, you do this, you do that, and it didn't work at all. And this time I took the approach, at least as much as I'm trying to really be like, okay, so you're going to help me, but how can we help you build like a powerful marketing agency through the collaboration we're doing? And it's been an amazing collaboration. Thank you, David.
Nice. Thank you, David.
If you were to boil it down to something practical and simple, what advice would you give to the listener who wants to live that dream life without limits?
Oh, it always comes down to drawing a line in the sand and just say, I'm making a decision to do that. I'm going to go from a quote from the book of the Tao, and it's 1,000. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And what people always start with, they're like, well, how can I do it? It's like, well, just take the first step. Do this exercise. Learn one skill, and it can be like copywriting. It could be like sales. It could be like Facebook ads. I mean, there's so many like digital marketers, like learning how to market and learning one skill. You learn that one thing. And if you can, and then help out, being an intern, not get paid, like of somebody like you really look up to, learn something and be able to hey, I'll come on board for a while and work for free. Do that. But it's like, it starts to also, like, for instance, people are, where do I start? I'm like, well, start with this create your perfect day exercise. It's simple. It's this, but once they take that first step, then they're going to take the next step. And then it's like, all right, do this.
Let's talk about create the perfect day. That's an exercise the listener could do now, for example,
absolutely,
at the end of this episode. So what would be the guidelines there?
What were the guidelines? So the video that I shoot, so if you just create your perfect day on YouTube, I'll pull up. It's
let's do a short one here and then they can watch the whole video.
So it's what your ideal average day would look like. And the questions you have is, what would your morning look like? What do you do when you first wake up? What are you going to eat for breakfast? What kind of people are you going to be associating yourself with? What kind of business are you going to be conducting? What is your perfect partner, or what does your partner look like? It's asking those provoking questions to where you have to think, right? Like what it would look like. And it's not doing these and like, oh, I'm living this perfect day. It also comes with action. So what action steps are you going to be taking in order to achieve that? Do
you get people to really feel the emotion that comes with it too?
If you don't have the emotion, then it's not going to go anywhere. Like, for instance, I can recite my perfect day of, I wake up and I'm gonna close my eyes and do this. I wake up at 6 a.m. Before the sunrise. I can smell the salt water and the air and hear the thundering ocean crash. And as I walk out with barely any light, there's double overhead waves. I paddle out to Middles in Hanalei Bay, and I go have a 2-hour incredible session getting barreled. I come back. I kiss my wife, I kiss my kids. And when I wrote that, I didn't have any kids at the time. But I knew I was going to have, if I had a daughter, it was going to be Hanalei. I eat breakfast with them, even though I don't eat breakfast anymore. I eat breakfast with them. I do a few hours of work on something I'm extremely passionate about. Then we go and we have lunch, and now I don't have lunch until 2 or 3, so it's a little different. But
I can feel what you can feel
this, because I can see, and when people can see and visualize what that would look like, and it gets that energy to where you're like, oh, how does that feel? Versus I'm waking up, taking a shower, and my freaking coffee is how my exercise, and I'm gonna jump in a car. Like, that sucks. But if you can feel that, it gives you the incentive of like, okay, I know it's not going to be easy, but is it worth it? You know, that's where it really starts. So it's all emotion. And when we're making decisions, you know, you have logic, but you're making the emotional decisions. You gotta have the logic to be able to, you know, it's to like, you know, to go like the logic to like, okay, this is why, but like the emotion going, like there's a reason it's that like, going with the gut and going with the heart. We got those, you know, you have to go with that. And it's, you know, otherwise I'd be a robotics engineer just thinking logically, and I'd still be doing the same thing.
Yeah, I feel that that's something maybe we need to learn more as men. I don't know, but we're often less connected to our emotions, but it's really important, that creation process.
You know, it's in like a few years ago, and I think I met you went to like the men's group, like in the last over at Nirvana. Have you ever been?
I haven't, but I'm part of some men's group.
Yeah. But it was like 3 years ago that, and I remember I was confronted when I think it was just right after the first of the year. It's like about 3 years ago. And there was a guy, Di Manuel, he was here for a couple of years, and he goes, I got a men's group. And I'm like, what's that about? And I'm like, man, and I remember we sat there, and I'm like, you know, typically a men's group would be going to the bar, having food and having drinks. And there's no drinks. We eat some food, but I was confronted. I was like, and they're talking about sharing your feelings, and I'm like, man, I ain't gonna share my feelings, because men, we're like, we don't share feelings. If you look at like how history, you hide those emotions. And when I went, I was like, wow, this is cool. And I'm not talking about like, hey, I'm going to a psychiatrist and bleed out, but it's like really sharing and you know, how to be a better man and sharing it with other men. And what the feminine energy, I read a book that was The Way of the Superior Man.
Yeah, David Deda,
yeah. And then I was like, whoa, from that book. And see, when you're saying, what are the steps? It's taking these little steps on like finding who's doing something that's something that you really aspire to be to, and what are they doing? And you start taking those steps every single day.
And I'm so grateful to be in Bali to start with, and also why I do that podcast. I can interview people that I'm inspired from and take a little bit from
exactly
all these pieces.
Because it's not like there's one way to do it. And that's like with my daughter, it's like, okay, what's the best way to teach her? And we've had a couple articles that have just went out, and it was about schooling, unschooling, and you know, homeschooling, and how do you do it? There's no right way. And like for like, what's your religion? I'm not really religious, but I'm spiritual, and I like to take something from like Hinduism and Buddhism, and I like this about Christianity, like, but it's like kind of making my own mix, right?
Yeah, and we've talked about we're gonna approach the end of this episode. I feel we could start going for another hour, but we'll limit it.
No worries.
We talked about how you challenges the views. You also told me like Hanalei never had vaccines, for example.
Yeah, and
I know it's something people weren't really doing. Now it's more of a debate with what's happening. I'm curious also, what's your view on what's happening in the world right now?
Yeah. Well, let me go back to when we made a decision. So my wife, she was working for GlaxoSmithKline, you know, one of the biggest pharmaceutical, right? And, you know, as a child, I was vaccinated, she was. And when we're having our daughter, and she was going through all these case studies, and that's what like had her like, I can't do this anymore. Like she's making good money, but she's like, I can't do this anymore. And she started reading books about like vaccines and like, you know, doing your own research. And I think that's the most important thing. People are they want to, like, you hear this on the news that's fed to you, and you think of the government and you're like, well, this is the way it must be. And when my wife, she presented it to me before Hanalei was born, she goes, I don't think we're going to vaccinate. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, and that was myself. But then she goes, I've done all this research, read this. And when I started reading, I'm like, Holy cow.
I remember 2 years ago, I was at the New Earth Festival listening to Del Bigtree, who's done amazing
Hanalei spoke just before Del.
And Del Bigtree, that if you can find him, because he's getting a bit censored recently.
And
but he's done amazing
cutting
research. And at first, I was really resistant to it. I was like, wow, that's super weird. And 2 years down the line, but at the time, it was nice getting more mainstream in a way to look into this. But
and that's before COVID, and so Hanalei spoke, and then Del he says, hey, if you're we got to know him at the New Earth, and he says, hey, if you're in LA, I'd like to have you on the show. So when we went to LA,
the High Wire,
so we were on the High Wire a year and a half ago, and he was asking, he goes, is Hanalei? I was like, no, and we just made a decision. This is before COVID, so. And I remember
but that's way before. Because you vaccinate children in the US when they're very young.
And
right?
so when we made a decision, I remember telling my buddy, my closest friend, and he looks at me, he goes, what the fuck are you thinking? Yeah. He's like, my best friend is saying that. And I go, well, we've done this research. He goes, how could you do that? Like, are you responsible? I'm like, yeah, actually, I'm doing the research and looking at this. And then we stopped talking about it because it's so ingrained in people's brain that you're like, I'm not even going to talk about it. This is just what we're doing. And like, Hanalei's been to 50 some countries. And I think she went to the hospital once because there was altitude sickness at 11,000 feet before we went to Machu Picchu. So, and she's been in every third world country, India, and she's pretty healthy.
Do your own research.
Do your research. So what do I have to say about it now? I want to see how things play out. I'm not going to say one way or another, but do your research and don't don't make decisions based on what you're being fed.
Brian, thanks so much.
You're more than welcome.
It's been amazing. And I'd love to ask you to close. Well, first, how can people follow you? Yeah. Also, what's exciting for you? What's the next thing? And I know you're looking into community thing also. So if you want to add that in the mix, I'm interested.
You can find me on officialbrianswan.com. That's my website. Unstoppable Family. If you do any Google search for Unstoppable Family, we're all in there. Unstoppablepamily.com. And I got a beard company. If you want some beard products for your bearded loved ones, unstoppablebeard.com.
I hope to be a customer in the next few years, but
I'm going to have to get my growth formula for you. So we got some work to do, and I'm formulating some new batches here. And the communities, I've been on the search. Even for a couple of years ago, we're like, how can we live like, so Bali's kind of that community of people that are think very alike, right? You can call it like awoke, you can call it whatever, and there's a lot of ones that are airy fairy and like, this is who I am. So
I live in Ubud, so
right. So Ron and I, we've talked about that, and ever since COVID happened, we're like, when you're like, I gotta have you think back before COVID of, if somebody would say like, hey, you're sustainable, so are you collecting your own water and doing your own food? You're like, you're kind of crazy. But we were thinking about it before, and it's like when COVID happened, I'm like, man, we gotta start preparing for this. We gotta start looking. So yeah, we're looking at different projects, and I think it's gonna wake people to how people really can live. It's not a fantasy. There is people, community, they can live together, and it doesn't have to be surrounded by what a government says, who's the president. And it's so funny to say living life in your own terms, but it's like, you got to make a conscious decision of what it's going to look like.
Those levels of sovereignty, right? I earn my own money, but then I don't know if you're into cryptos, but then I'm my own bank, and then I produce my own food without all these chemicals. And it's going to lead very soon to our nations, I believe.
Absolutely.
And that's something I'd be willing to talk about for another hour.
Nah, it's very true. Yeah. It's not far out there.
Thank you so much, Brian. Do you have a last word for our listener?
Last word is, that expiration date. I've started a lot of talks that I've done is, what does 6 months mean from you now? And, if you think about 6 months, it's like, What is that? But if you knew that was the day that you're going to die, or let's say 1 or 2 years, what are the things that you would be doing today? Like really doing. And if you really start taking that, it's like what I was telling you about of making it a priority. Like if you just said, let's just say 3 years to kind of put it off, but you had 3 years left to live, what would you be doing now? And when you let that sit in your freaking bones, you're going to be doing different things, but you got to make it a priority.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you to the listener.
Suk sama, as we say here in Bali.
Thank you for taking some of your precious time to listen to this podcast. If you stayed until the end, I assume it was insightful. So if you like this podcast, please share with friends. Remember that if you tag us in your Instagram story at the Lightleaders podcast, we will repost. Tell us what you've learned. You can also leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Now, if you want to stay posted about new podcast releases, especially as we get censored more and more on big tech platforms, make sure to join our newsletter and our Telegram. You'll find the links on thelightleaders.org. And feel free to contact me directly too, whether it's for feedback or potential collaborations. Thank you again, and let's co-create the conscious new earth together. Thank you for watching my YouTube channel. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and to subscribe to my channel.